Hi, good morning, everyone. We will start with any questions that you have from the last module, from the last project. No, no, nothing.
Easy.
Yeah, so much easier.
You explain it so well.
It's hard to think where to start. That's maybe the problem. I was talking to them, and it's been quite tricky to find direction in this week's assignment. It felt like there were two big blocks, the designing and the development part, and that difference was not completely clear. And yeah, I think also the documentation was tricky to navigate and to study and understand like what was more important. So should I spend a couple hours writing the license, or code of conduct, or that kind of stuff? Yeah, I don't know for the rest.
I think that there was the overall idea of the assignment, I think was clear, but with the detail, like who writes certain file, which parts of the plan could be done cooperatively and which parts of the plan could be done individually. So there were a lot of small questions that came from the big description that were a little bit unclear. That was confusing.
Is it now more clear?
Yeah, now it's more clear, but
We can
there's
still
still
go
a few
over it.
things that I was kind of 50-50 on, but it's more clear than before. Yeah.
Do you want to maybe share the assignment and we can go over that?
Sorry,
Oh, yeah.
sharing the- I'll look for it.
Yeah.
What else? That won't work.
Oh no.
You can go to the home, chapter 2 home.
Yeah. You have the tab open already. Oh, we got now.
Ah, yeah, this one.
Yes.
And then the deliverable.
So I guess it's this,
So we
one, right?
did update the description to help a little bit. I think to help, the one thing that Galila pointed out is what's confusing also was separating the design from the development. Because in the last module, you kind of did the two together, where the point of this project was start to separate the two, but that wasn't so clear. So hopefully this double diamond approach makes that a little more clear, where the first thing you do before you ever write anything, you explore all possibilities to understand the problem, and then you begin to define the problem until you reach the middle where you have a clear problem statement or a clear definition of what this person needs for their homepage before you've written any code. So you begin by just interviewing them, learning about them, looking at other web pages, and then you begin to become more precise. They liked this about themselves. They want people to know that. They like this sort of design, so they need a web page like this. And then you begin the second phase, which is developing and delivering. And in there, you also explore. So at the beginning, you're thinking, I don't know how CSS Flexbox works very well. I'm going to spend some time just exploring Flexbox. Maybe actually Bootstrap is helpful. So you spend some time exploring Bootstrap. You make a couple drafts. You see what makes sense. And then you start to narrow down and you build the actual thing that you'll deliver. Of course, design is a cyclical thing. It's never so linear, but it's a way to think about the phases you go through. So of course, as you start actually developing, you can still show it to the person and you can still make changes, but it helps if you, in your mind, you think about, okay, right now I am designing. Right now I'm exploring my options. Next thing I'm going to do is narrow down my options. So that's a better way to maybe understand the different phases of the project. If you scroll down a little bit, try to make that more clear here as well and in the checkboxes. We should go down and look at the checkboxes first. So we tried to make that similar split in the checkboxes for your issue, where first you're designing, you're doing the first diamond collaboratively. And so those planning documents, those are the interviews, the personas, the backlog, the wireframe, and the design retrospective.
So I guess my first question there is with the stakeholder interview and the user personas, the way that we did it was I just worked on that with Sonic.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that's something that we should have done with like the greater group.
So
or not.
Exactly how you did it isn't so important. What's matter is that you're practicing the different types of interviews. And so this is something we'll also make more clear. The stakeholder interview would be Sana. She's the one that's more personally invested in this website and has the reason to be there. So you would talk, I mean, correct me, actual designers if I'm wrong. So you're talking to her to figure out what does she need from this thing. Then the user interviews would come later when you have some designs and you'd show it to someone else as a user of the website and say, what do you think? What do you think of Sana? Did this design work?
So this part we shouldn't have done yet.
No, that's part of the first, that's the design part.
Okay.
And because you can show someone a wireframe and ask them to use it.
But he shows me, not.
Yeah, so that's something that we were also figuring out over the week as we saw what wasn't clear and as we saw what was clear. So this is also a design process, this whole curriculum, we're designing it with you.
Yeah.
So every time you say something is confusing or something is interesting or helpful, that helps us be more clear. So yeah, this wasn't so clear before, that's true.
Yeah, it's just like the overall stuff, like the diamonds, I think that was like, I understood that pretty well.
Okay.
I can't speak for other people, but for me that was okay. But then like the individual sections, like the smaller steps, for me that was quite confusing.
And before the checklist was more confusing because it was,
Yeah,
All
before
together.
it was, yeah,
So
so,
following the one you guys showed on the,
yeah, that was the one that does the initial design. This is the
Okay.
updated design after
Okay.
feedback.
but we did
After
follow
you
some kind of checklist.
Yeah,
We-
But the checklist was more confusing about what you do alone and what you do separately.
Yes, exactly, that's,
yeah.
true.
Yeah, after your feedback, we went back again and tried to divide what you do together and what you do individually. So the design part is for a group work and the deliver part is individual.
Yeah, this is definitely better. This
That
is
makes
more
sense,
clear.
yeah.
Any other questions?
I saw a finger back there.
Yeah, I think it felt quite overwhelming for me because I can clearly see there are like big topics that mashed together in this model. I would say UX is something that you could like really study in depth. Also UI design with the Gestalt concepts and all of that. The open source contribution like licensing, code of conduct, all of that is also a big topic. And also accessibility. So I saw like all of that together somehow in that mode, and I was unsure where to start with what was more important.
Yeah. Most important is, for my point of view, is that you get this whole idea of design, of listening to someone else, understanding what they need, and building what they need. Everything else around that is a part of the implementation for me. If you really know what your user wants and how they're thinking, then that will guide your UI decisions. So if you're going down a rabbit hole of fonts, you just come back to the user and that can guide, do I need to go any further into fonts or not? And so for me, the thing is just always come back to the user and let that guide you. But I realize it's also not the best, clearest advice. So yeah, I'll try to put some more priorities in there as well. Updates from actual designers?
I think if you understand the basic principles like typography, what's important, the principle of Gestalt, if you just know these basic principles, then you already have come a long way. topics are so deep that it's a different job than a developer actually. So you have designers, UI designers, UX designers. Those are separate roles, but sometimes a developer can be it as well. But it's very much, the topic is very broad, and you're absolutely right that it is a lot of different topics mashed together, because that's just the way it is. But the theory coming up hopefully will give you a better overall view of the topics.
Yeah, I was also saying to Ellen that with those presentations in the starter folder, I don't know if you can show it, there are 2 PDFs.
This one? Yeah, maybe you can see it from there.
There are 2 presentations from 2 people, I guess, from previous versions of
And the GitHub
agriculture,
Yeah.
with like really nice overall
Projects.
view of the.
I think it's project.
Yeah, that one, slides.
This one?
Oh, slides. Okay.
Slides, yeah.
Okay.
I think those 2 presentations just saved my week.
Yeah, I'll be giving this one from Benjamin. I will be reusing that.
Because it gives you like the big picture.
Yeah. So that was also the goal of this day, to teach you the big picture.
Okay.
Now you can go home, Daniel.
You already know everything.
Yeah. Okay. Is that all the question that you have? How many of you did the assignments this week? Show of hands.
Or started and maybe didn't finish.
Started.
Yeah, that's another thing that wasn't so clear. You are not expected to finish your homepage. That's
Yeah.
too fast. You're just starting it. And then you can continue working on it.
And communication, how was the communication part with your partners? You too, I know.
Meeting afterwards.
Okay.
I tried, but it's not easy.
We could take into account schedules next time.
Yeah.
Note for that.
Okay. The floor is
Let's
for you.
go.
Yes.
All right. So welcome everybody. Maybe I'll introduce myself again for people who don't know me yet. I'm Arno. I work at Access, and together with the health coaches, Thibaut, Stan, Lorenzo, and Maud, we will try to teach you something about UI design and Figma. So what's on the agenda for today? First, basic introduction into UI design. Then a little exercise, a break. I will show you some tips and tricks in Figma, and then we will work on your home pages in Figma here in the class, and we can help you out with any problems. So the first part is the Gestalt principles. Louder? Yeah. So the first principle is proximity. So objects that are close to each other automatically belong to each other in our mind. So we believe they are related in some way. So we have 2 examples. In this one, the texts are at an equal margin from each other, and they don't look like they belong together. And over here we have the 2. So the name and the title, they are closer to each other, so we automatically assume they are related. And the opposite is true as well. Sorry, was that question? So the opposite is true as well. If they are farther from each other, they are not related. This is another example. So you see all the information that is related to each other is closer together, and then the other item has a bit more margin. This is a bad example. This is way too high. So we don't believe they are related, but actually they are. So don't do that. This is another example. So this is related, this is related, and this is related. That's the entire page of Hack Future, but it's all the same examples. Similarity. So when objects look like each other, I'm going to share. When objects look like each other, they also convey a sense of similar function of, or relation. So this is a bad example. These are three types of objects that are differently styled, and they look like different things, but actually they're the same things. And this is a good example where they're all in a uniform formatting. So we have the picture, the title in the same font, the description, and a read more link. And because they are all the same, they have a sense of similar function and relation. So this is another that example. We have two types of filters, but maybe we should have styled it in the same way. And this is a good example. So we have all the products and they are styled the same. And then we have like little ads that are styled differently. So you can clearly see that there's something different than an article that you can buy. Similarities of buttons. If they all look like the same thing, like the same button, you assume automatically that they do kind of the same thing. That's why we have different type of buttons. So you have the primary button. That is a button for the primary action of your page. So the most important one, the functionality for which your page is designed. So for example, if I have a page where I can add a product, then the add button or the save button should be the primary button. We have secondary buttons. These are actions that are used, but not as the primary action. So, but also used a lot. Then the tertiary actions are actions that you want to hide a little bit because you don't need them as much, but they still have to be available. And then you can work with color as well. So if you do something destructive, like a delete of a button, then you can replace your primary button with a red primary button. Continuation. So we instinctively follow paths of least resistance. So if you see this figure, for example, we will follow the line or the circle, but not something like this. Yeah, here is the explanation I did, but visualized. So we also have a continuation on pages. So if you're reading a page, you're not going to go like this and then look here and then there. No, you're going to read it logically from left to right and then down. So we call that the F plot because it's in the shape of an F. So like on Google, you're not going to read like this and then this and then that. No, you're going to read the entire list. Or you're going to look here first because it's bigger, and then going to parse the list. So figure ground, that basically means that everything you look at has a background and a foreground. So this big image of the planet, that's the background, and then the content, the big title and the button, that's the foreground. So here the same, yeah, we have the background, and then the shoe really pops. So that's also considered on the foreground, and then the buy button and the title, that's also foreground. So you can, because this image is the same image, but still the shoe is on the foreground and the rest of the background. So it's not because it's in the same image that it's on the same level of figure ground. Closure, so we as humans automatically see shapes even if they don't exist. Right? For example, this one, we have all those fragments pointing at each other, but the thing we really see is the square in the middle. Here is the same, and over here, that's some kind of psychological test. You can see two people looking at each other, or you can see like a chandelier in the middle. And you can do the same things with icon design or logo design. Like the S is really in the void between the letters, so you can make cool logos like that. Then symmetry. Symmetry really provides you with some harmony, and it's visually pleasing. But they can also be dull and static if you use it too much. So try to break out of the symmetry sometimes. And these are some great examples. You see, and we have the symmetry here, and then here is a little bit of asymmetries to make it interesting, and then we have the symmetry again. And here we have also a bit of not asymmetry, but we just make it a bit more visually pleasing on this. There we go. Simplicity. We like objects that are simple, so keep it simple. This is an example from the Olympic logo. And then if you design mobile first. It's a really great tip because 50%, because I'm not pointing as much, 50% of web traffic is on mobile, so it's one of the most important things to design for. You can use progressive enhancement. It's a really fancy word to say just do what's possible on the phone, and then if you go to a device that can do more stuff, just add those stuff if you're on that device, but don't do it. Yeah, that's badly explained, sorry. So an example, maybe you have a big video background for your homepage, but on mobile you have limited data, so you're not going to do that on mobile. But if you go to the big screen, you're probably on a home computer where you have Wi-Fi or connection with the wire. So there you can do your fancy video background also because you have a big nice screen. So progressive enhancement basically means start with the basic functionality and add the fancy stuff as you go to mediums that are where it's possible to show those fancy tricks. Also forces to focus on content because you have a really small screen, so you really have to put all the really important stuff on there first, so you don't have a lot of place for putting your decorations. It's also easier to develop because if you start with your big screen first and you put all the information there, and then you have to scale it down, that's really hard. But if you start on a small screen, put all your information on it, it's much easier to do it on a bigger screen afterwards because you have all those places where you can go. It's also good for your SEO rankings. SEO is search engine optimization, so it's basically how high you get in the list of Google. Then we have the grid, scale, and spacing, also really important. So what is a grid actually? A grid is some kind of system where you position your elements on. And it makes it really easy to have things like symmetry or equal spacing around your page. I'll show you later in Figma how you can use the grid as well. So remind me if I forget. We basically have three main parts, but you can't really see it on this screen because the beamer doesn't like light colors. But if you look on your own screen, you can see the red lines are basically the columns. So that's where you position your objects on. You have the gutters, and the gutters are the spacing between your columns. And then you have your side margin on both sides, left and right, from the grid to the rest of the page. And this is a more practical example. You can't really see it. So if you position an object over multiple columns, then you will take the gutter as well. But between two objects, you leave the gutter open. So why do we use the grid? It's to group related items, so you can put them together underneath or next to each other. You can create hierarchy, and you can align items together easily. So, for example, these ones, you can align them underneath each other nicely on the grid. Now we have typography, also really important. It's everywhere. This is a page without typography, so it's not much to see on Wikipedia if you don't have text. This is Facebook, also not a lot to see. And this is YouTube, a video platform, but if you don't have text, not really useful. So it's a very broad topic, like all the rest of the design stuff, but I'll try to give you some pointers. So meaning, typography has a meaning. If you use a really curved font, it looks really cute, but might not be as useful on a banking site, for example. So the typography really gives you a feeling. So be really careful with that. Legibility. Some fonts are really not legible, like this one. You can't really see the difference between a capital I or an L. And yeah, this one is just, I can barely read it. It looks like an A, but it's really an I. So when choosing a font, be sure to look for that it's readable. And we have readability. Now on the screen, this is actually better than on my screen, but there are several problems. So the first problem is the line height. It's really mashed together, so you can't really read it comfortably. It's very, how do you say it in English? It's very in your face, and it's hard to focus on the lines. Also, the contrast, yeah, it's darker here on the presentation, but if you look at it on the screen, it's a light yellow on a white background, so there's no real contrast. So for people that are bad-sighted, they can't read it. So this is a better example, a black on white, very big contrast, so easy to read, and more line spacing, so it's easier for your eyes. This is how we read, so in saccades. So if we miss, we basically fix our eyes on the symbols. So we just read some words, and our brain automatically fills in all the stuff in between. And if we don't figure it out, we go back to the previous one and we read what's in between. That's basically our brain work. And the color of text. There's basically three big things. Line height, like I showed you in the previous slides. It's really important to have the line height set right. We have font size, so how big your letters are, and then line width. So the basic rule of thumb is how the shorter your how small, but in the width. How do I explain? Line width. Yeah, line width. So the shorter your line width. So if you have text, for example, from this size, the smaller your line height can be. But if you have a really long line, you all have that feeling when you're reading a book and you're like, oh, what line was I on? That's because the line height was too small. So if you make it larger, it's easier for your eyes to see the next line. So that's really important. And of course, the line height will depend on the font size. Here's the example I was looking for. Okay, so basically, because this block is close to each other, it's still easy to see where the next line is, but it's easier if your line height is bigger. So a tip is to start with 140% of your font size to start with, and then you can figure out what looks good. This is the thing I was telling you as well. So the bigger the line, so the tip here is to have 50 to 75 characters per line as a rule, but you can always look on your design. It makes sense. So it's basically design is a lot of trying out what looks good and not some set rules. So yeah, this is the thing that I said, font size. If you have a large font, yeah, basically the line height should be relative to the font. Because if you have a big font and the line height is the same than for other text, it will look pressed together. So if you have a smaller font with the same line height, it's much more legible. Then we have colors. So why do we have color in our designs? Yeah, because it looks good. If everything is black and white, then it will be a bit dull. And it's also, a color has a psychology as well. So for example, blue has a feeling of safety, green nature, and so on. Orange dynamic. So there's a really psychology behind these colors, and that's why you should also focus on the interviews and what kind of person is he or she or they, and match that color to the person. You can also, that's another tip, you can also add some color to some titles, for example, of buttons to give them more clarity or make them more, to make them pop up. Now we're going to talk about color harmony. And we have this slide with some fancy words, and you won't really understand it unless I draw it. So I will draw it. So basically, when you are in elementary school, you learn about the primary colors. Can anybody tell me what the primary colors are? So we have red, blue. Red, blue, and green are the primary colors.
Yeah.
So we have red, blue, and green.
And then red, blue, and yellow. Red, blue, is digital.
Yeah, sure. Yes. I have been to elementary school. So, can anybody tell me what you get when you mix red with yellow?
Red with yellow.
Yeah, I was confused as well with the RGB. Okay, so we figured it out. It's red, blue, and yellow. So the secondary colors are when you mix those colors. So can anybody tell me what belongs here? Orange, blue and yellow,
Green.
red, green, and then we have blue and red.
I looked it up.
That's purple, and you can keep blending those colors so you get more colors in between, and then we get the color. And so what that means, analogous or monochromatic, is that you just take one of those colors from the color wheel, blue, and take different forms of lightness. So basically, you have the color, and that's the blue, and we have saturation, that's how much color we have in the color. So if you have 0 saturation, you have gray, and if you have 100% saturation, you just have the color. And now we have lightness, HNL. There's a color system for you. Lightness is how light the color is. So 0 is black and 100 is white. So if you take this color and we want a monochromatic color scheme, we just take one color and we change this parameter. So, or this one. But to keep that one the same. So we can have blue, we can have gray, or everything in between, or we can have white or black. So that's why that works. Then we have, oh no, so that's a monochromatic one. We have triadic. It's another example. That's like this triadic on the whole field. So we do that. Triangle. So this color matches with this one, and you can also play around with these. And then complementary is when you go opposite, like this. And then you also have another one, quadratic, and it's like square. So it's a bit of math, actually, but it's really fun to draw it out. So that's why I did it. And you can also see that, I'll maybe show you, if you go to color.adobe. Really nice site to make your color schemes. Get the tour, but this is the color wheel of which I was talking about, but the outside. So you can see here in the left we have all those different types of color schemes. So we have the monochromatic, and you will see they are on the same line. The middle of the circle what a word, is the lightness. So you can see they are on the same line on the color wheel, but they have, and if we change the color mode to HSB, it's the same as HSL, but for it's brightness instead of luminance. So basically, yeah.
Is there a particular reason to go with a certain color scheme that has to do more with accessibility, with the type of site and building? One building a website for a key shop, then I will go with like how to control, like how do you make that decision?
Yeah, it depends a lot on the client or the product that you're making, and also how much color you want. So monochromatic, it's easy, it's one color, and you have different shades of it. So that's one you want one. And if you need more color, you can go to a system like Triad, where you have 3 complementary colors, or Square, where you have 4. So that's kind of how you decide, but a lot is testing out. Yeah. So you can use all those different types of harmony rules to make your own color scheme. And you can see, for example, monochromatic, that the hue is the same, 58, sorry, but the S and the saturation and the brightness values have changed. So that's that. I think So you also have Google Color, for example, where you can do the same thing as in Adobe Color. It's really what you want to use. So a really big one, I said it already with the text, is contrast. So when you're picking colors, please make sure that the contrast of the text or whatever you want to show is big enough with the background. Because, for example, that one, you can't read the text from over there, I guess. From here, it's barely legible. But if you use a lot of contrast, it's really, really easy to read it. Also, some people have disabilities in their eyes, so they can't really see it well. And if you have that contrast, the upper one, they won't be able to read it. So it's really, really important to have a good contrast always. Here we are, accessibility. Why? Because everybody deserves to use the website. I don't have to explain that one. There are some guidelines from Microsoft that you should check out. It's really interesting. So you have tools to check the contrast. There is a plugin in Figma Stark that you can use. I'll show it to you later. I don't have it installed, but I'll show it anyway. And it gives you a rating of your contrast. So this one, that's not contrasted enough because I can read it from here, but you won't be able to read it. And you basically have 2 ratings. I'm not sure what the difference is. You have AA and AAA. One is better than the other, but I'm not sure. But I guess if you click that button, you will know. So we won't do it later. Is there anybody know? No. So that's embarrassing.
They're now green, no?
I'll check it out later. Yeah. So this is an example of a good contrast, and you will see you have the green check marks. You can also convey information with color, but be careful with that. Because if I'm colorblind, I can see that the upper one is wrong because it's red, and you can see it, and you know red is a bad color, so I probably did something wrong there. But if you are colorblind, you won't be able to see it. It's just a gray border. And I will show you some tools in Chrome later too to look at your own website as a colorblind person. It's really interesting. I'll show it. Please remind me if I forget.
I found what the difference is between the two.
Okay.
And there are even 3 standards. So you have the A, which is viewed as the minimum level of contrast that you need. Then you have AA, which is an acceptable level of accessibility for the contrast. And then the AAA is like the gold standard. So
yeah, that's, so always aim for the AA or the AAA.
Yeah.
Some companies say what kind of level you need for your designs. So it can be a policy. So as I was explaining, if you're colorblind, please add some other visual elements so they can see something is wrong. So if I'm colorblind and I see the second one, I can see there is an exclamation mark. So I know, oh, that one is probably wrong. Also, I had a great example of a banking app, and it was just your profit margin was colored green or red. But then we had some clients that were colorblind because they were old people. Yeah, that's not necessarily a combination. That's always true, but he couldn't see if he was doing great or really bad with his portfolio because it was just a color. So we had to add a little arrow up or down to let him know if he was doing great or he should sell his house. So touch targets, it's not really in your Figma design that you will have to take this in account, but more when you're web designing, make sure your touch targets are big enough. So Google recommends 48 pixels minimum height and width to comfortably tap on your smartphone, because your thumb is about that size. So, of course, if you have this header, you could attach your click listener on the icons, but that won't be easy to click. So what's better is to actually just divide your bar in 3 big parts and click on the entire part. It's much easier to click on. There's nothing worse than a little button that you have to click on your smartphone. It's really frustrating. So don't do it. Focus styles indicates when certain elements have focus, because not everybody uses a mouse to click. Some people use tap. For example, people who can't use a mouse. For example, my girlfriend's grandfather, he has the Parkinson, so you can't click on anything, so he has to use the tab key to navigate between all the fields. So please make sure that you indicate that a field is selected, because otherwise it's really hard to see.
And also make sure that the order, if you press tab to the next field that it goes, that it's logical. Because I went to some site and it was like, I start there, then I go to there, and it's like a whole roller coaster of fields before you get to the next one.
If you think quickly about how that happens, with CSS, you can put anything anywhere. So you might have 2 input fields next to each other in your HTML, but the CSS spreads them all over the place.
But you can fix that as well with HTML attributes, which you can indicate the order of tab. But I don't know it by heart.
Learn that later.
You'll learn that later. But just
Or Google it.
yeah, indeed. Just know that it exists, and if you need it, Google it. And there's a lot more, like everything. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So tabbing order we already discussed. Thank you, Lorenzo. Screen reader. So when you're blind, you don't look at the screen because you can't see. But they have a screen reader that reads the page to you. So you have to add some labels, ARIA labels, and that makes sure that the blind people actually listen to something useful and not just complete rubbish. And there's also a tool in Google, I guess, to
Lighthouse.
yeah, Lighthouse, and there is also a tool that visually represents the tree that blind people navigate. But I don't know where it is, but I know it exists. So I will Google it and I will know it. So now we have practice time. You have 20 minutes to find on your own interesting websites, either good ones or really bad ones. Those are the most fun. And you just analyze them.
And there are a lot of bad websites online,
Yeah.
I can assure you.
I'll look as well, because I know some really good ones, some really good bad ones. And then the next 40 minutes, you will go in groups and put your findings together and discuss them, and then choose some topics to present to the entire class.
Maybe we do 10 minutes and 50 instead of 20, 40.
Yeah.
I have elaborated too much on the color.
Oh, no, just because it's much less. Now that we're here in person, I'd
Okay.
be more interested to spend time in the second part.
Okay, I'll
So 10 and
guess,
50 instead of 20, 40.
I'll look at, I'll make the groups. Do you have suggestions?
Random.
No, but how much?
We should
how many
keep
people?
them the
Three
same.
people?
You
Oh, yeah,
should
same
keep them the
groups, yeah.
same group as you were last week.
Okay.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm updating the randomizer for the groups to have a bit more stuff on. But I think it's not finished yet.
Oh, okay, nice.
It really hurt my eyes.
Yeah, it hurts, right? Blame him. He's-
Volgens mij heeft een was gewoon een was.
I don't
Ja,
think
op
there's
de
any
stage.
I will.
Just walk around and.
Yeah.
be friendly.
Als je
Ja.
rechts de elements of the accessibility. Dus gewoon
Ja.
Ja, dat moet je. Kijk, daar
Can you
buiten.
believe this? Just because we put them,
I'll try to show.
Stop the recording.
I will stop recording now.
Awesome.